The story follows Samuel Miller, a grieving Amish farmer who discovers a dying dog collapsed near his barn. Despite his community's practical view of animals, Samuel's compassionate heart leads him to nurse the dog back to health. Through caring for Buddy, Samuel begins to heal from his own emotional wounds while learning that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. The story builds through multiple challenges: community disapproval, the dog's slow recovery, bonding moments, and a dramatic climax where Buddy's loyalty saves the family. The emotional ending reveals how love and compassion can transform both the giver and receiver, bringing healing to a broken family. The November wind cut through Lancaster County like a scythe, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the promise of winter's first snow. Samuel Miller pulled his black coat tighter as he walked toward his barn, his weathered boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. At 52, his beard had grown more silver than brown, and the lines around his eyes spoke of both laughter and sorrow, though these days sorrow seemed to win. 2 years since Martha had been called home to the Lord, and Samuel still found himself setting 2 cups for morning coffee, still turned to share a thought with empty air. The farm felt too quiet now, despite his children Ruth and Jacob still living under his roof. Even they seemed to tiptoe around the spaces where their mother's laughter used to ring. "Papa, breakfast is ready," Ruth's voice carried across the yard from their white farmhouse. At 16, she had inherited her mother's gentle way with words, but Samuel could see the weight she carried trying to fill Martha's shoes. "In a moment," he called back, reaching for the barn door. His daily routine never changed: check on the animals, milk the cows, feed the chickens, and pretend that keeping busy would somehow fill the hollow ache in his chest. The barn door creaked open, and Samuel stepped into the familiar warmth scented with hay and livestock. But something was wrong. His mare Daisy was restless in her stall, pawing at the ground and snorting softly. The chickens were unusually quiet, huddled together as if sensing danger. "Easy, girl," Samuel murmured, approaching Daisy's stall. "What's got you so?" He stopped dead in his tracks. There, collapsed against a bale of hay near the back of the barn, lay what appeared to be a bundle of matted golden fur. Samuel's heart lurched as he realized it was a dog, barely breathing, ribs visible through its filthy coat, eyes closed in what looked like final surrender. "Ach, du lieber Gott," he whispered, the Pennsylvania Dutch of his childhood escaping in his shock. "Dear God." Samuel approached slowly, kneeling beside the creature. It was a medium-sized dog, probably a golden retriever mix, though it was hard to tell beneath the dirt and matted fur. The animal's breathing was shallow, labored, one ear was torn, and Samuel could see the sharp outline of every rib. This dog hadn't eaten properly in weeks, maybe longer. "How did you get in here, friend?" Samuel asked softly, extending his hand. The dog didn't respond, didn't even lift its head. "And how long have you been waiting for someone to find you?" The practical side of Samuel's mind, the side shaped by Amish values of efficiency and purpose, told him to leave the animal be. Dogs were working creatures, not pets. If this one was too weak to work, too far gone to save, then nature should take its course. That's how his father would have handled it. That's how most of his neighbors would handle it. But as Samuel looked at the dog's peaceful face, something stirred in his chest, something he hadn't felt since Martha's funeral, a pull toward compassion that had nothing to do with practicality. The dog's eyes fluttered open, revealing warm brown irises clouded with pain and exhaustion. For a moment, human and animal looked at each other in perfect silence. Then the dog's tail gave the faintest twitch, not quite a wag, more like a whisper of hope. "Samuel," Ruth's voice came from the barn entrance. "Papa, your eggs are getting cold, and Jacob's asking if he should start the milking without." She stopped mid-sentence as she spotted her father kneeling beside the strange dog. "Oh my, stay back, Ruth," Samuel warned, though his tone was gentle. "We don't know if it's sick." But Ruth had inherited more than her mother's voice. She had Martha's inability to turn away from suffering. She approached slowly, her long blue dress rustling against the hay-strewn floor. "The poor thing," she breathed, crouching beside her father. "Papa, look how thin it is. When do you think it last ate?" "Too long ago," Samuel replied grimly. He reached out tentatively, letting the dog smell his hand before gently touching its head. The fur was softer than he'd expected beneath the dirt, and at his touch, those brown eyes focused on him with desperate gratitude. "We have to help it," Ruth said simply, as if there were no other option to consider. Samuel felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Ruth was 16, old enough to understand the world's harsh realities, but still young enough to believe they could all be fixed with enough kindness. He envied her that faith. "Ruth, this dog is very sick." "It might not, but it might," she interrupted, a spark of her mother's gentle stubbornness flashing in her eyes. "Mama always said that God puts broken things in our path so we can learn to mend them. Maybe this little one is meant for us." Samuel felt his throat tighten. Martha had indeed said that, usually while nursing a bird back to health or tending to a neighbor's sick child. She had possessed an unwavering belief that everything happened for a reason, that even the smallest act of kindness rippled outward in ways they might never see. "Papa," Jacob's voice joined them from the doorway. At 14, Samuel's son had grown tall and gangly, all arms and legs, and earnest brown eyes. "What's—" "Oh," he stopped when he saw the dog. Is it alive?" "Barely," Samuel replied. "And I'm not sure what we can do for it." "We can try," Ruth said. "Can't we just try?" Samuel looked at his children, really looked at them for the first time in months. Ruth's eyes held a desperate hope, as if saving this creature might somehow make sense of all the senseless loss they'd endured. Jacob's face showed the careful consideration of a boy trying to be a man, weighing practicality against mercy. And in that moment, Samuel saw Martha in both of them, saw her gentle strength in Ruth's determination, her quiet wisdom in Jacob's thoughtful silence. Maybe Ruth was right. Maybe God had put this broken creature in their path for a reason. "All right," he said quietly, surprised by his own decision. "We'll try." Ruth's face lit up like sunrise, and even Jacob smiled, the first real smile Samuel had seen from either of his children in months. But Samuel continued, holding up a cautioning hand. "We do this carefully. No sudden movements, no loud noises. This dog has been hurt, and hurt creatures sometimes bite, even when we're trying to help." "What should we do first?" Ruth asked, practically bouncing with nervous energy. Samuel studied the dog, thinking, "First, we need to get some water into it, just a little at a time. Too much, too fast could make it sicker." "Jacob, fetch a shallow bowl and fill it with lukewarm water from the pump." "Ruth, see if we have any of that chicken broth your grandmother canned last month." As his children hurried to their tasks, Samuel remained beside the dog, one hand resting gently on its head. The animal's breathing seemed a bit stronger now, as if sensing that help had arrived. "What are we going to call you?" Samuel murmured. "Can't very well nurse you back to health without a proper name." The dog's tail gave another weak flutter, and Samuel found himself almost smiling. "Buddy," he decided. "You look like a buddy to me. Simple, friendly, a good name for a fresh start." As if in agreement, Buddy's eyes closed peacefully, no longer fighting for each breath, but resting in the security of human kindness. Samuel Miller, who had thought his heart too broken to care for anything new, felt something shift inside his chest, a tiny crack in the wall of grief he'd built around himself. Outside, the November wind continued to blow, but inside the barn, something warmer had begun. The next 3 days blurred together in a rhythm of careful hope and quiet desperation. Samuel found himself checking on Buddy every few hours, sometimes catching Ruth or Jacob already there, speaking in soft whispers to the slowly recovering dog. "Easy now, boy," Samuel murmured on Wednesday morning, kneeling beside Buddy with a bowl of warm chicken broth. "Just a little more. Buddy had managed to lift his head yesterday, the first real sign of progress, and now his brown eyes tracked Samuel's movements with growing awareness. The dog's ribs were still painfully visible, but his breathing had grown stronger, more regular. "Papa, look!" Ruth appeared at Samuel's elbow, her face bright with excitement. "I think he's actually hungry now. See how his nose twitches when he smells the broth." She was right. Buddy's nostrils flared slightly as Samuel brought the bowl closer, and for the first time since they'd found him, the dog made an effort to move toward food, rather than simply accepting what was offered. "This is good," Samuel said, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. "Very good." Jacob joined them, fresh from his morning chores. At 14, he'd taken on extra responsibilities without complaint, understanding that Buddy's care was consuming much of his father's attention. "The miller's buggy just turned up our lane," Jacob reported. "Looks like Uncle Ezra's coming for a visit." Samuel's stomach tightened. Ezra Miller was his younger brother, a practical man who served as a deacon in their church district. If Ezra was coming, it likely meant word of Buddy's presence had spread through their tight-knit community. "Ruth, take the broth inside and warm some more," Samuel instructed. "Jacob, make sure the barn looks tidy. And both of you, let me do the talking." His children exchanged knowing looks but obeyed without question. They'd learned to read their father's moods in the 2 years since their mother's death, and they recognized the tension that always accompanied visits from church leadership. Ezra's buggy pulled to a stop near the barn, his bay mare snorting steam in the cold morning air. At 48, Ezra possessed the same Miller build as Samuel, tall, broad-shouldered, with intelligent eyes beneath bushy brows. But where Samuel had grown gentler with grief, Ezra had grown more rigid with responsibility. "Brother," Ezra greeted, climbing down from his buggy with the careful movements of a man who'd spent his life doing physical labor. "I trust you and the children are well." "Well enough," Samuel replied cautiously. "What brings you out so early?" Ezra glanced toward the barn, then back at Samuel. "I've heard talk. The Yodas mentioned seeing Ruth carrying bowls to your barn. The Zooks said they heard you asking Bishop Stoltzfus about caring for sick animals during Sunday service." "People are curious." Samuel felt heat rise in his cheeks. He'd forgotten how quickly news traveled in their community, how every action was noticed and weighed against their shared understanding of proper behavior. "I found a dog," he said simply. "It was dying. I chose to help." "A dog?" Ezra's tone was carefully neutral. "Not a working dog, I'm assuming. Or you would have mentioned its purpose." "No, just a dog." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. In their community, animals served functions: horses for transportation, cows for milk, chickens for eggs. Pets were a luxury that drew time and resources away from family and community needs. "Samuel," Ezra said gently, "I know these past 2 years have been difficult. Martha's passing left a hole that won't ever be filled. But perhaps this attachment to a stray animal isn't the healthiest way to deal with your grief." The words stung because they contained a grain of truth Samuel didn't want to acknowledge. Was he using Buddy as a substitute for the companionship he'd lost? Was he teaching his children to form inappropriate attachments? "It's just temporary," Samuel heard himself saying, "until the dog is strong enough to find its way." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they rang false. Already, in just 3 days, Buddy had become part of their routine, part of their healing. Ruth hummed while warming his broth, and Jacob had started talking to the dog about his day while doing barn chores. The dog wasn't just recovering, he was bringing life back to a house that had been too quiet for too long. A soft whine drew both men's attention to the barn. Through the open door they could see Buddy struggling to stand, his legs shaky but determined. The dog had heard Samuel's voice and was trying to come to him. "Buddy." "No," Samuel called, hurrying into the barn. "Stay down, boy, you're not strong enough yet." But Buddy had managed to get his front paws under him. his tail attempting a weak wag as Samuel approached. When Samuel knelt beside him, the dog pressed his head against his hand with unmistakable affection. Ezra had followed Samuel into the barn and now stood watching the interaction with unreadable eyes. "Buddy," Samuel felt his face flush. He needed a name. "I see." Ezra studied the dog for a long moment. "He's in bad shape. He was worse 3 days ago. Couldn't lift his head, barely breathing. Now look, he's trying to stand." As if to prove Samuel's point, Buddy made another attempt, this time managing to get all 4 legs under him before wobbling and settling back down with what sounded suspiciously like a sigh of frustration. Despite himself, Ezra's mouth twitched. "Determined little fellow. He is." Samuel ran his hand gently along Buddy's back, feeling the dog relax under his touch. "The children have been helping. It's given them something positive to focus on." Ezra nodded slowly, his expression softening as he considered this. Ruth and Jacob had struggled with their mother's death, withdrawing into themselves in ways that worried the entire community. If caring for this dog was bringing them out of their shells, Bishop Stoltzfus is concerned, Ezra said finally. "Not about your kindness, that's never been in question, but about the precedent. If Samuel Miller can keep a pet, why not every family in the district?" "I understand his concern," Samuel replied, "but I'm not asking anyone else to do what I'm doing. I'm not claiming this is right for everyone. I can't turn away from something that needs help. I tried to the first day, but Martha always said." He stopped, surprised by the sudden thickness in his throat. "What did Martha say?" Ezra asked gently. Samuel took a breath, steadying himself. "She said that God puts broken things in our path so we can learn to mend them, that sometimes we're the ones who need mending most of all." The barn fell quiet, except for Buddy's soft breathing and the rustle of hay as he settled more comfortably against Samuel's leg. Ezra watched his brother's face, seeing something he hadn't witnessed in 2 years, a spark of purpose, of engagement with life. "The dog stays in the barn?" Ezra asked. "Of course, he's not a house pet." "And when he's well?" Samuel hesitated. The question he'd been avoiding, the decision he wasn't ready to make. "When he's well, we'll see what God has planned." Ezra studied his brother for another long moment, then nodded. "I'll speak with Bishop Stoltzfus, explain the situation. Perhaps there's room for mercy in our understanding of stewardship." Relief flooded Samuel's chest. "Thank you, brother." "Don't thank me yet," Ezra warned. "The bishop may still have concerns, and some in the community won't understand. The Fishers particularly. You know how they feel about unnecessary sentiments." Samuel nodded grimly. The Fishers were respected members of their district, but they held rigid views about maintaining proper separation between humans and animals. They would see Buddy's presence as a dangerous softness, a crack in the disciplined life their community worked hard to maintain. "I'll face that when the time comes," Samuel said. After Ezra left, Samuel remained in the barn with Buddy, processing the conversation. The dog seemed to sense his troubled thoughts, resting his head more heavily against Samuel's leg in a gesture of comfort. "What am I doing, boy?" Samuel murmured. "Am I helping you or are you helping me?" Buddy's tail gave a gentle thump against the hay, and Samuel found himself almost smiling despite his concerns. Maybe that was the point. Maybe sometimes the helper and the helped weren't so easily separated. Ruth appeared in the doorway with a fresh bowl of broth. "Pop, how did Uncle Ezra's visit go?" "Better than expected," Samuel admitted, "though we may have some challenges ahead. Are we keeping Buddy?" The hope in her voice was impossible to miss. Samuel looked down at the dog, who had managed to lift his head again and was gazing at Ruth with obvious anticipation. 3 days ago, this creature had been dying. Now he was responding to voices, showing personality, becoming part of their lives in ways Samuel hadn't expected. "For now," he said carefully. "For now, we're Buddy." Ruth's smile could have lit the entire barn, and even Buddy's tail managed a proper wag at the sound of his name. Outside, the November wind continued to blow, but inside their small sanctuary, warmth was growing stronger by the day. By the end of the first week, Buddy had managed his first real tail wag, not the weak flutter of hope from those early days, but a genuine full-body expression of joy that made Ruth clap her hands in delight. "Look, Papa," she exclaimed, kneeling beside the dog in the barn's morning light. "He remembers us." It was true. Buddy's eyes now followed each family member with recognition and affection. When Samuel entered the barn, the dog would lift his head and attempt to rise. When Ruth brought food, his tail would start its grateful rhythm before she even reached him. And when Jacob sat nearby doing homework after school, Buddy would inch closer until his head rested against the boy's leg. "He's putting on weight too," Jacob observed, running his hand along Buddy's side. "I can't feel his ribs as much anymore." Samuel nodded with satisfaction. The dog had graduated from chicken broth to small portions of real food, scraps from their meals mixed with warm milk and bits of bread. His coat, while still matted in places, had begun to show hints of its original golden color beneath the dirt and tangles. "I think he's ready to try walking outside," Samuel decided. "Just to the yard and back. Fresh air might do him good." They helped Buddy to his feet, an easier task now that he had some strength in his legs. The dog wobbled for a moment, then took a tentative step forward. His legs were still shaky, but they held his weight. "Come on, Buddy," Ruth encouraged, walking slowly toward the barn door. "You can do it." Step by careful step, Buddy followed her out into the crisp December morning. The moment his paws touched frost-covered grass, his entire demeanor changed. His ears perked up, his nose began working overtime, and his tail wagged with an energy they hadn't seen before. "He remembers," Samuel murmured, watching the dog's obvious joy at being outdoors. "Wherever he came from, he remembers freedom." Buddy managed to walk halfway to the house before his strength gave out, but instead of collapsing, he lay down in a patch of weak sunshine and turned his face to the sky with what looked remarkably like contentment. "I'll get a blanket," Ruth said, already heading for the house. "He shouldn't get cold." As she hurried away, Samuel and Jacob settled beside Buddy in the grass. The dog immediately pressed against Samuel's side, seeking warmth and comfort. "Papa," Jacob said quietly, "what happens when he's completely well? Will we have to give him up?" The question Samuel had been dreading. In the Amish community, keeping animals that served no practical purpose was seen as wasteful, even selfish. Dogs were for protection or hunting, not companionship. Yet Buddy had already become so much more than a rescued stray. "I don't know, son," Samuel admitted. "I've been praying about it, asking for guidance, but I won't lie to you, it's complicated. Because of the church." Samuel nodded. "Some folks think we're being foolish, that we're teaching you children to form attachments that aren't proper." Jacob was quiet for a moment, absently stroking Buddy's ear. "Do you think we're being foolish?" Samuel considered the question seriously. Was it foolish to feel his heart lighten every time Buddy wagged his tail? Was it wrong that his children smiled more now than they had in months? Was he failing as a father by allowing them to love something that might be taken away? "I think," he said finally, "that there's more than one kind of wisdom in this world, and sometimes what looks foolish to men makes perfect sense to God." Ruth returned with an old quilt, which they wrapped around Buddy's still thin frame. The dog accepted the attention with patient dignity, as if he understood he was being cared for by people who loved him. They might have stayed there all morning, enjoying the peaceful moment, if not for the sound of approaching buggy wheels. Samuel looked up to see a familiar black carriage turning into their lane, the Fishers, as Ezra had warned might happen. "Ruth, Jacob," Samuel said quietly, "take Buddy back to the barn." Gently now, his children recognized the tension in his voice and moved quickly, but carefully, helping Buddy to his feet and supporting him on the short walk back to shelter. Samuel stood and smoothed his coat, preparing himself for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. Amos Fisher climbed down from his buggy with the deliberate movements of a man who'd made up his mind about something. At 63, he was one of the most respected elders in their district, known for his strict interpretation of their community's values and his unwillingness to compromise on matters of principle. "Samuel Miller," Amos greeted, his tone formally polite but cold. "I trust I find you well." "Well enough, Amos. What brings you by?" "I think you know." Amos's pale blue eyes were sharp with disapproval. "Word has spread about your project. People are talking." Samuel felt his jaw tighten. "People always talk." "Yes, they do, and what they're saying is that Samuel Miller has lost his way, that grief has clouded his judgment, that he's forgotten the proper relationship between man and beast." The words hit harder than Samuel expected, partly because they echoed his own doubts. "The dog was dying. I chose to show mercy." "Mercy?" Amos repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. "Samuel, we live by rules for good reason. We maintain separation between ourselves and the world's ways, because that separation keeps us pure. When we wait treating animals like family members, like pets, we begin walking down a dangerous path." "And what path is that?" "The path of emotional indulgence, of putting feelings above duty, of teaching our children that every whim, every soft sentiment deserves to be followed." Amos's voice grew stern. "Your children have already lost their mother. Do you think it's wise to let them form another attachment that will only lead to heartbreak?" The criticism stung because it contained truth. Samuel couldn't deny. Ruth and Jacob had indeed grown attached to Buddy. If the dog had to be given up, or worse, if something happened to him, they would be hurt all over again. "The dog will recover soon," Samuel said carefully. "When he does, we'll make appropriate decisions. Will you?" Amos studied Samuel's face with unnerving intensity. "Or will you find excuses to keep him? Convince yourself that he's earning his keep somehow?" "I've seen it happen, Samuel. Good men who start making exceptions, telling themselves each compromise is the last one." Before Samuel could respond, a commotion erupted from the barn. Ruth's voice, high and frightened. "Papa, Papa, come quick." Both men hurried toward the sound, Amos's criticism forgotten in the face of obvious emergency. They found Ruth and Jacob kneeling beside Buddy, who was convulsing on the barn floor, his legs rigid and his eyes rolled back. "What happened?" Samuel demanded, dropping to his knees beside the dog. "He was fine when we brought him in," Ruth said, tears streaming down her face. "Then he started shaking and fell over and won't respond to us." Samuel placed his hands on Buddy's trembling body, trying to hold him still. The dog's breathing was rapid and shallow, his heart racing beneath Samuel's palm. "Is he dying?" Jacob whispered. "I don't know," Samuel replied honestly. He looked up at Amos, who stood in the barn doorway watching the scene with an expression Samuel couldn't read. "Amos, please, could you fetch Dr. Henderson from town? He treats large animals, but he might know something about dogs." For a moment, Amos didn't respond. Samuel could see the internal struggle on his face, his disapproval of the situation warring with his basic human decency. "Papa, please," Ruth begged Amos. "Buddy's going to die." The word "papa" broke something in Amos's stern facade. Ruth had called him that without thinking, the way all the children in their community addressed respected elders. And in that moment, he wasn't an elder dispensing judgment. He was simply a man watching children suffer. "I'll go," he said gruffly. "But the doctor may not come. He's not fond of our ways." "Tell him it's an emergency," Samuel said. "Tell him children are involved. He'll come." As Amos hurried away, Samuel continued holding Buddy, speaking softly to the convulsing dog, while his children watched in terrified silence. The seizure lasted another minute before gradually subsiding, leaving Buddy limp and unresponsive in Samuel's arms. "Is he?" Jacob couldn't finish the question. Samuel felt for a heartbeat, found one weak but steady. "He's alive, just unconscious." Ruth wiped her eyes with her apron. "What caused it, do you think?" "I don't know. Maybe the excitement of being outside was too much. Maybe he's sicker than we realized." Samuel smoothed Buddy's fur with gentle strokes. "We'll have to wait for the doctor." They waited in tense silence, taking turns monitoring Buddy's breathing, offering prayers both spoken and silent. The dog's condition remained stable, but fragile, his body occasionally twitching, as if fighting invisible battles. When Henderson finally arrived, a gruff English man with kind eyes and gentle hands, he examined Buddy with professional thoroughness, while Amos watched from the barn entrance. "Malnutrition," the doctor concluded. "Severe and prolonged. His body's trying to recover too fast, putting strain on his heart and nervous system." The seizure was his system's way of saying slow down. "Will he be all right?" Ruth asked anxiously. Dr. Henderson looked at her tear-stained face and softened his tone. "With proper care and patience, yes, but recovery will be slower than you hoped. No excitement, no sudden changes, just steady, gentle nursing." After the doctor left, Amos lingered in the barn, watching Samuel settle Buddy on a soft bed of blankets. The confrontation they'd been having seemed unimportant now, overshadowed by the reminder of how fragile life could be. "You love that dog," Amos observed quietly. Samuel looked up, surprised by the gentle tone. "I didn't mean to. It just happened." Amos nodded slowly, as if this admission confirmed something he'd suspected. "Love usually does. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The seizure changed Wessinks. For 3 days after Doc Henderson's visit, Buddy barely moved, lying listlessly on his bed of blankets, while the Miller family took turns sitting with him. Samuel found himself checking on the dog every few hours through the night, watching for signs of another episode. "He's not eating enough," Ruth worried on the 4th morning, kneeling beside Buddy with a bowl of warm broth. "He just licks at it and turns away." Samuel studied the dog's dull eyes and lackluster coat. The seizure had set back Buddy's recovery significantly, and Samuel wondered if they were fighting a losing battle. Maybe Amos Fisher had been right. Maybe this was just prolonging the inevitable. "Papa," Jacob said quietly, "I have an idea." Samuel looked at his son, noting the determined set of his jaw, an expression that reminded him powerfully of Martha when she'd made up her mind about something. "What kind of idea?" "Yesterday, when I was doing chores, I noticed Buddy's ears perk up when he heard Daisy whinnying, and when the chickens got excited about something, he lifted his head to look. Maybe he's lonely. Maybe he needs company that isn't just us bringing him food and medicine." It was a surprisingly mature observation from a 14-year-old, and Samuel found himself considering it seriously. Animals were social creatures, and Buddy had been isolated in the back corner of the barn, away from the other livestock. "You think we should move him closer to the animals?" "I think we should let him be around them, not close enough to get kicked or pecked, but where he can see and hear and smell that he's not alone." Ruth's face lit up. "Jacob, that's brilliant. Mama always said that healing happens better when you don't feel forgotten by the world." The mention of Martha sent a familiar pang through Samuel's chest, but it was gentler now than it had been even a week ago. His children were finding ways to honor their mother's wisdom while creating new memories of their own. They spent the morning rearranging the barn, moving Buddy's makeshift bed to a spot where he could observe the daily routines of the farm animals. The effort exhausted the weak dog, but Samuel noticed something different in his eyes, a spark of interest that had been missing since the seizure. "Look," Ruth whispered, pointing to where Buddy lay. "He's watching Daisy." The horse was munching hay in her stall, occasionally glancing toward the dog with what appeared to be mild curiosity. After a few minutes, she approached the edge of her stall and stretched her neck toward Buddy, who managed to lift his head in response. "She's saying hello," Jacob observed, with wonder. As if to prove him right, Daisy nickered softly and Buddy's tail gave the faintest wag in return. It was the first sign of real responsiveness they'd seen from him since the seizure. Over the next hour, they watched a remarkable transformation. The chickens, initially wary of the dog, began venturing closer when they realized he posed no threat in his weakened state. One particularly bold hen, Ruth's favorite, named Gertie, actually approached Buddy's blanket and began pecking at scattered grain nearby. Buddy watched this activity with growing interest, and by afternoon he had managed to eat a full bowl of broth while observing the barn's social dynamics. "You were right, Jacob," Samuel said, clapping his son on the shoulder. "Sometimes healing isn't just about medicine and food. Sometimes it's about remembering you belong somewhere." The words carried more weight than Samuel had intended, and he saw understanding flicker in both his children's eyes. They'd all been isolated in their grief, he realized. Perhaps they all needed reminding that they belonged somewhere too. Their moment of quiet satisfaction was interrupted by the sound of an approaching buggy. Samuel tensed, expecting another visit from concerned church members, but relaxed when he recognized the driver. "It's Mary Yoder," Ruth said with relief, "and she's brought someone with her." Mary Yoder was Martha's closest friend, a gentle woman in her 50s who had helped the Miller family through the darkest days after Martha's death. The passenger in her buggy was a young woman Samuel didn't recognize, probably in her early 20s, with the simple dress and head covering of their community, but something different about her bearing. "Samuel," Mary greeted warmly as she climbed down from the buggy. "I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit. I wanted you to meet my niece, Sarah. She's visiting from the Lancaster settlement." Sarah stepped forward with a shy smile. She was petite and pretty, with gentle brown eyes and an air of quiet competence that reminded Samuel of Martha at that age. "It's wonderful to meet you," Sarah said. "Aunt Mary has told me so much about your family." "All good things, I hope," Samuel replied, suddenly conscious of his work-stained clothes and the fact that his hair probably smelled like barn animals. "Very good things. And I understand you've been caring for a sick dog?" Samuel felt his defenses rise slightly. Had Mary brought her niece to add another voice to the chorus of disapproval? "We found him dying," he said carefully. "We've been nursing him back to health." "How wonderful," Sarah said with genuine warmth. "May I see him? I've always had a way with animals." Surprised by her enthusiasm, Samuel led the visitors into the barn where Buddy lay surrounded by his new animal companions. Sarah approached slowly, speaking in soft, soothing tones. "Hello, beautiful boy," she murmured, kneeling beside Buddy's blanket. "Look at you, so brave and strong." To everyone's amazement, Buddy lifted his head and actually attempted to wag his tail. Sarah extended her hand for him to sniff, then gently stroked his head when he showed no fear. "He likes you," Ruth observed with delight. "Animals often do," Mary explained. "Sarah has a gift with them. Back in Lancaster, she helps the veterinarian when he makes calls to our farms. She's learned quite a bit about animal care." Sarah was examining Buddy with the practiced eye of someone who understood animal physiology. "He's been through seizures, hasn't he? I can tell by the way he holds his head, the slight tremor in his legs." "How did you know?" Samuel asked. "I've seen it before in dogs who've suffered severe malnutrition. The good news is that with proper care and patience, most recover completely. But it takes time, sometimes months." "Months," Samuel repeated, feeling both hope and trepidation. Months meant deeper attachment, more community scrutiny, more difficult decisions ahead. "The other good news," Sarah continued, still stroking Buddy's head, "is that this boy has strong spirit. Look at his eyes. He wants to live, to be part of a family again. That matters more than you might think." "Again?" Jacob picked up on the word immediately. Sarah nodded. "This isn't a dog who's been wild or mistreated by humans. Look at how he responds to gentle touch, how he seeks eye contact. Someone loved this dog once, trained him, cared for him. Something happened, maybe his owner died, maybe he got lost, but he remembers what it's like to belong." The observation hit Samuel like a physical blow. Of course, Buddy's immediate trust, his desperate gratitude for kindness, his obvious familiarity with human companionship. This wasn't just a stray they'd rescued, this was someone's beloved pet, lost and starving, and probably searching for his way home. "We should ask around," Ruth said softly. "See if anyone is missing a dog." Samuel felt his heart clench. The right thing to do, the proper thing, would be to find Buddy's original family if they still existed. But the thought of giving up the dog now, when he'd become such an integral part of their healing, felt almost unbearable. "Yes," he said, though the word came out hoarse. "Yes, we should do that." Sarah seemed to sense his internal struggle. Of course, if his original family can't be found, or if they're no longer able to care for him, she left the thought unfinished, but her meaning was clear. Sometimes lost things found, new homes, sometimes second chances were exactly what everyone involved needed most. Mary watched this exchange with knowing eyes. "Sarah will be visiting for several weeks," she said casually. "Perhaps she could stop by from time to time, check on the dog's progress. She's taught me quite a bit about animal care over the years." "That would be very helpful," Samuel said, meaning it. Having someone with actual knowledge of animal medicine would ease his worries about Buddy's recovery. "And if anyone asks questions about your situation, well, Sarah's assistance gives it a more practical purpose," Mary added with a slight smile. "Animal husbandry is certainly an acceptable pursuit." Samuel understood the gift Mary was offering, a way to deflect community criticism by framing Buddy's care as educational rather than purely sentimental. It wasn't a complete solution, but it bought them time and respectability. After the visitors left, the Miller family gathered around Buddy's bed as evening settled over the farm. The dog seemed more alert than he'd been all week, and Samuel wondered if Sarah's confident prediction of recovery had somehow communicated itself to their patient. "Papa," Ruth said quietly, "what if we can't find his first family? What if we can keep him?" Samuel looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at Jacob's equally expectant expression, then down at Buddy, who was gazing up at all of them with clear affection and trust. "Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it," he said finally. "For now, let's focus on getting him well." But in his heart, Samuel was already building that bridge, already imagining a future where Buddy's gentle presence continued to bring light into their grieving home. Whether the community approved or not, 2 weeks after Sarah's first visit, Buddy had regained enough strength to walk the length of the barn, without assistance. His coat had begun to shine with proper nutrition, revealing beautiful golden fur with white markings on his chest and paws. More importantly, his Herntz was emerging, gentle but playful, intelligent and deeply affectionate. "He knows his name now," Ruth observed, watching Buddy's immediate response when she called him. "And look how he sits when you ask him to. Someone definitely trained him well." The evidence of Buddy's previous life as a cherished pet had become impossible to ignore. He knew basic commands, was perfectly house-trained during his brief visits to the yard, and showed the kind of social skills that only came from being raised with love and patience. Samuel had been dreading this conversation, but he could no longer avoid it. "We need to start asking around," he said heavily. "Someone somewhere might be missing him." Jacob's face fell. "Do we have to, Papa? What if his family doesn't want him back? What if they abandoned him on purpose?" "Jacob," Samuel said gently, "look at this dog. Really look at him. Does he seem like something someone would abandon by choice?" Even as he spoke the words, Samuel hoped desperately that Jacob would find a way to argue, to convince him they didn't need to search. But his son was too honest, too much like Martha, to ignore the obvious truth. "No," Jacob admitted quietly. "He seems like something someone would love very much." Sarah arrived that afternoon for her scheduled visit, bringing with her a leather collar she'd found at the general store. "Every dog needs proper identification," she explained, buckling it around Buddy's neck. "And every family needs to know their dog is safe." The collar transformed Buddy from rescued stray to family pet, and Samuel felt his heart clench at how right it looked. But Sarah's words carried an unmistakable message. They had responsibilities beyond their own desire. "I've been thinking about the best way to search," Sarah continued, settling beside Buddy and accepting his enthusiastic greeting. "We could post notices at the general stores in surrounding counties, ask the mail carriers if they've heard anything. Lost dogs sometimes travel surprising distances." "How far might he have come?" Samuel asked. "Hard to say. In his condition when you found him, probably not more than 10 or 15 miles. But before he got sick and weak, he could have traveled much further. Sarah scratched behind Buddy's ears, earning a contented sigh. The good news is that a dog this well trained, this socialized, would have come from a family that cared deeply. They'd be searching too. The implication hung in the air. If Buddy's original family was looking for him, they deserved to know he was safe. And if they weren't looking, well, that would tell them something too. I'll write up some notices, Samuel decided, though each word felt like swallowing stones. Simple descriptions asking if anyone recognizes him. I can help distribute them, Sarah offered. I know people in several counties through my work with the veterinarian. Word will spread quickly through the right channels. Ruth had been unusually quiet during this conversation, and Samuel noticed tears gathering in her eyes. Ruth, what's troubling you? I know it's selfish, she whispered, but I don't want to give him back. I know we should. I know it's right, but I can't help how I feel. Is that terrible of me? Samuel pulled his daughter close, feeling his own emotions mirror hers. It's not terrible, Liebchen. It's human. We've all grown to love him. That's not something to be ashamed of. But what if his first family wants him back? Jacob asked. What if they've been heartbroken this whole time, thinking he was dead? The question hit Samuel like a physical blow, because it forced him to imagine the scenario from the other side. If Buddy had been his dog, if he'd searched and worried and grieved, how would he feel knowing someone else had found his beloved pet and grown reluctant to return him? Then we do the right thing, he said quietly. No matter how much it hurts. Over the next several days, Samuel found himself studying Buddy with new intensity, memorizing everything about the dog's personality and habits. Buddy had a way of tilting his head when confused, of bringing his favorite stick to whoever looked sad, of pressing against Samuel's leg during evening prayers, as if he understood the solemnity of the moment. He's part of our family now, Ruth said one evening, watching Buddy play gently with a rope toy Jacob had made for him. Even if we can't keep him, he'll always be part of our family. The notices went up on a Thursday. By Friday, Samuel was already regretting the decision. By Saturday, he was praying that no one would respond. By Sunday, during church service, he was asking God's forgiveness for his selfishness, while simultaneously begging that Buddy could stay. The answer came on Monday morning. Samuel was in the barn with Buddy when he heard an unfamiliar buggy approaching. Through the open door, he watched a middle-aged English couple climb down from what looked like a rented carriage, their movements urgent with hope and fear. The woman saw Samuel first and hurried toward him, her husband close behind. She was perhaps 40 half, with kind eyes and graying brown hair, wearing simple clothes that suggested modest means but deep dignity. "Excuse me," she called. "Are you Mr. Miller? We saw your notice at Kaufman's store about the dog you found." Samuel's heart began pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it. "Yes," he managed. "Yes, I am. We've been looking for our dog for 6 weeks, the man said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Golden retriever mix, about 3 years old. He went missing from our farm during a thunderstorm in October. 6 weeks. The timeline matched perfectly with when they'd found Buddy. His name is Max," the woman added, and Samuel felt the world tilt around him. He's very friendly, knows basic commands, has a white star on his chest, and white paws. Every detail matched Buddy perfectly. Samuel felt his mouth go dry. Could we see him?" the man asked gently. "We know it might not be our Max, but we have to try. We've been searching everywhere, putting up our own notices, asking everyone we meet. Our children have been heartbroken." Children. Of course there were children. Samuel closed his eyes briefly, fighting the selfish part of his heart that wanted to lie, to claim Buddy wasn't there, to protect his own family's happiness. "He's in the barn," Samuel said quietly. "But I should warn you, he was in very bad shape when we found him. Very sick, very weak. He's much better now, but he's been through a lot." The couple exchanged glances filled with hope and terror. "May we see him?" Samuel led them into the barn where Buddy was resting in his usual spot, surrounded by the animal friends he'd come to know. The dog looked up at the approaching strangers with polite interest, his tail beginning its customary welcoming wag. The moment the woman saw him, she gasped and pressed her hands to her mouth. "Oh my God! Max? Max, is that you, baby?" At the sound of his original name, Buddy's entire demeanor changed. His ears shot up, his tail began wagging frantically, and he struggled to his feet with more energy than Samuel had seen from him yet. "Max?" the man called, dropping to his knees. That was all it took. Despite his still recovering strength, Buddy launched himself toward the couple with pure joy, whimpering and wiggling and trying to lick their faces while they both wept and held him. "It's him," the woman sobbed, burying her face in Buddy's, Max's fur. "It's really him. Oh, Max, we thought we'd lost you forever." Samuel stood frozen, watching the reunion, feeling his own heart break and mend simultaneously. The love between this dog and these people was unmistakable, overwhelming, beautiful, and devastating. Ruth and Jacob appeared in the barn doorway, drawn by the sounds of crying and excitement. Samuel saw the exact moment they understood what was happening, saw their faces crumble as they realized their worst fear was coming true. "He's going home," Jacob whispered, and Samuel heard his own grief echoed in his son's voice. The English couple, the Hendersons, they introduced themselves, were overwhelmed with gratitude. They insisted on paying for Max's care, offering money Samuel refused to take. They wanted to know everything about his recovery, praising Samuel's family for their kindness and dedication. "You saved his life," Mrs. Henderson said, tears still streaming down her face. "We can never repay you for giving us our Max back." But as Samuel watched Max press against his original family with desperate affection, he knew the truth. They weren't losing Buddy, they were giving Max back to where he belonged. And that knowledge, painful as it was, felt strangely right. "When will you take him?" Samuel asked, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "Tomorrow, if that's all right," Mr. Henderson replied. "We want to let him rest one more night. Make sure he's strong enough for the journey home." "One more night," Samuel nodded, already dreading the morning, already missing a dog who hadn't left yet. But as he watched Max's joyful reunion with his first family, Samuel began to understand that love sometimes meant letting go, even when your heart wanted desperately to hold on. The Henderson family left that afternoon, promising to return first thing in the morning to take Max home. As their buggy disappeared down the lane, Samuel felt the weight of the approaching goodbye settle over his entire family like a heavy blanket. "I know we should be happy for him," Ruth said quietly. Watching Max, she couldn't bring herself to call him Buddy anymore, play with his rope toy in the barn. "They love him so much, and he was so excited to see them. But it hurts, Papa. It hurts so much." Samuel pulled his daughter close, feeling her tears soak through his shirt. "I know, Liebchen, it hurts me too." Jacob stood nearby, trying to be strong but failing to hide his own grief. "Will we ever see him again?" "I don't know," Samuel answered honest. "The Hendersons live 3 counties away, but Max will remember us, just like we'll remember him." As if sensing the family's sorrow, Max abandoned his toy and came to press against Samuel's legs, looking up with concerned brown eyes. His tail wagged tentatively, as if asking why everyone seemed so sad. "He doesn't understand," Ruth whispered. "He doesn't know this is goodbye." The observation broke something loose in Samuel's chest. Of course Max didn't understand. All he knew was that his first family had found him, and his second family was crying. In his simple, loving heart, he probably thought everyone should be celebrating together. "What should we do tonight?" Jacob asked. "Our last night with him." Samuel considered this carefully. They could spend the evening grieving, preparing themselves for the pain of separation, or they could celebrate the gift they'd been given, the chance to love and be loved by this remarkable creature, even if only for a short time. "We're going to have the best night Max has ever had with us," Samuel decided. "We're going to show him how much we love him and how grateful we are that God brought him into our lives." Ruth looked up with surprise. "Really? Go to the house and fix him a special dinner. Some of that beef we've been saving, maybe with gravy and vegetables. Jacob, gather up all his toys and that old blanket he likes. Tonight Max gets to sleep in the house with us." "In the house?" Jacob's eyes widened. "But Papa, the rules. Some rules are meant for ordinary times." Samuel said firmly, "This is not an ordinary time." Ruth's face transformed with sudden joy. "Can we really? Can Max really sleep inside with us?" "Just for tonight," Samuel confirmed. "One special night to show him how much he means to us." The children rushed off to make preparations, their grief temporarily forgotten in the excitement of giving Max the most wonderful evening possible. Samuel remained in the barn with the dog, stroking his golden fur and marveling at how much their lives had changed in just a few weeks. "You came to us broken, friend," he murmured, "and somehow you've helped heal us too. I hope we've given you as much as you've given us." Max pressed closer, resting his head on Samuel's lap, with a contented sigh that seemed to say yes, they had indeed given each other exactly what they needed. An hour later, the Miller house was transformed. Ruth had prepared a feast, fit for a king: tender beef, with gravy, fresh vegetables, warm bread, and even a small cake she'd baked in Max's honor. Jacob had gathered every toy and comfort item Max had accumulated during his stay, creating a cozy nest beside the fireplace. When they brought Max into the house, his wonder was obvious. He moved carefully through each room, sniffing everything with fascination, his tail wagging constantly as he explored this new territory. "Look how he acts," Ruth laughed through her tears. "Like he's been invited to a palace." Max eventually settled by the fireplace, surrounded by his toys, watching the family with bright, happy eyes. They ate dinner together, Max on the floor with his special meal, the family at the table sharing stories about their favorite memories of him. "Remember the first day he tried to stand?" Jacob said. "How determined he looked, even though his legs were shaking. Remember when Gertie the chicken started following him around?" Ruth added. "Like she thought he was her baby chick." "Remember when he brought me that stick during evening prayers?" Samuel contributed. "Like he wanted to participate somehow." Each memory was precious, proof that Max had touched their lives in ways that would last long after he was gone. As the evening wore on, Max gradually moved closer to the family, eventually resting his head on Samuel's feet with complete trust and contentment. Sarah arrived just as they were finishing dinner. Having heard about the day's developments from Mary Yoda, she took one look at Max sleeping peacefully by the fire and smiled with gentle understanding. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "He looks so happy, so loved." "We wanted to give him one perfect night," Samuel explained. "But you'll do the hardest thing love sometimes requires," Sarah finished. Letting go, she settled beside Max, who opened sleepy eyes to acknowledge her presence with a lazy tail wag. "You know, Samuel, what you've done here, what your whole family has done. It's extraordinary. You found a dying creature and didn't just save his life. You gave him love, purpose, belonging. You helped him remember what family feels like. And now we're losing him," Ruth said quietly. "No," Sarah said firmly. "You're not losing him. You're giving him the greatest gift possible. You're sending him home whole and healthy and full of love. The Hendersons will have their Max back because of you. Their children will grow up with their beloved dog because you chose compassion over convenience." Samuel felt tears burn behind his eyes. "It still hurts. Of course it does. Love always hurts when it has to let go. But look at him." Sarah gestured toward Max, who had rolled onto his back in complete trust and relaxation. "Does he look like a dog who's been merely endured, or does he look like a dog who's been treasured?" "Treasured," Jacob answered without hesitation. "Then you've succeeded. You've loved him completely, even knowing you might have to give him up. That's the purest kind of love there is." As the evening deepened, They moved to the living room where Max could stretch out on the rug before the fireplace. Samuel read aloud from the Bible while Ruth brushed Max's now gleaming coat and Jacob worked on a leather bookmark. He wanted to give the Hendersons something to remember the Miller family by. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," Samuel read, his voice steady and calm. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." Max's breathing grew deep and even, but Samuel noticed that the dog kept one eye slightly open, as if determined not to miss a moment of this special evening. It was as though he somehow understood that this was a goodbye, even if he didn't understand why. When it came time for bed, Max followed them upstairs, a privilege he'd never experienced before. Samuel had prepared a soft bed for him on the floor of the main bedroom, but Max had other ideas. With careful determination, he managed to hop up onto the foot of Samuel's bed and settled there with a satisfied sigh. "Max," Samuel said gently, "down." But Max looked at him with such pleading eyes, such obvious desire to be bells for this one night, that Samuel's heart melted. "Just for tonight," he conceded, and Max's tail thumped gratefully against the quilt. As the house settled into quiet, Samuel lay awake listening to Max's peaceful breathing. Ruth and Jacob had said their goodnights, spending extra time petting and whispering to the dog they'd come to love so deeply. "Papa," Ruth had whispered as she left the room, "do you think God brought Max to us for a reason?" "I think God brings everything to us for a reason, Liebchen. Sometimes we understand the reason right away. Sometimes we have to wait years before it becomes clear." "What do you think Max's reason was?" Samuel had considered this carefully. "I think Max came to remind us that our hearts aren't broken beyond repair, that we can still love, still care for something beyond ourselves. And maybe he came to show us that letting go with love is different from losing something to death." Now, in the darkness, Samuel understood the truth of his own words. Losing Martha had been devastating because it was final, unexpected, cruel. But letting Max go was painful in a different way. It was chosen, deliberate, an act of love rather than a surrender to loss. Max shifted on the bed, moving closer until his warm body pressed against Samuel's side. In the darkness, Samuel reached out to stroke the dog's soft ears one more time. "Thank you, friend," he whispered. "Thank you for showing us that our hearts still work, that we can still choose love, even when it hurts." Max's tail gave one gentle thump in response, and then they both settled into sleep, their last peaceful night together, wrapped in gratitude and love, and the bittersweet beauty of knowing that some gifts are meant to be temporary, but no less precious for their brevity. Tomorrow would bring goodbye, but tonight belonged to love. Samuel woke before dawn to find Max's warm body still pressed against his side, the dog's steady breathing a comfort in the pre-morning darkness. For a moment he allowed himself to pretend this was just another ordinary day, that Max would stay forever, that they wouldn't have to break their own hearts in a few hours. But the illusion couldn't last. Today was the day they gave Max back to where he belonged. Moving carefully to avoid waking the sleeping dog, Samuel slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to start coffee and begin the morning chores. The familiar routines felt different, knowing Max wouldn't be part of them much longer. Ruth was already in the kitchen, her eyes red with sleepless tears, but her chin set with determination. "I made Max's favorite breakfast," she said quietly, gesturing to a bowl of scrambled eggs mixed with bits of bacon, "and I packed some treats for his journey home." The Hendersons said it would be several hours by wagon. Samuel's throat tightened at his daughter's thoughtfulness. Even in her grief, she was thinking of Max's comfort. "That's very kind you, Liebchen." Jacob appeared in the doorway, carrying Max's collar and leash, items they'd bought just days ago, thinking they'd have months or years to use them. "I polished his collar," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "And I finished the bookmark for the Henderson children. I wrote a letter too, telling them about Max's favorite games and the foods he likes best." The generosity of his children's hearts overwhelmed Samuel. Even facing the loss of something precious, they were focused on Max's well-being and his reunion with his first family. Martha would have been so proud. "Should we wake him?" Ruth asked, glancing toward the stairs. "Let him sleep a little longer," Samuel decided. "He had such a good night. Let him have a few more peaceful minutes." They prepared everything in quiet reverence. Max's traveling supplies, the gifts for the Henderson family, a small bag of his favorite toys that Ruth insisted he should take with him. Each item felt like a piece of their hearts being carefully wrapped and prepared for departure. The sound of wagon wheels on the lane came too soon. Through the kitchen window, Samuel watched the Henderson family approach, both parents and two children, a boy about Jacob's age and a younger girl with pigtails. The children were practically bouncing with excitement, their faces bright with joy at the prospect of being reunited with their beloved pet. "They're here," Samuel announced, unnecessarily. Everyone had heard the wagon. Ruth ran upstairs to wake Max, while Samuel and Jacob went outside to greet the Hendersons. The morning air was crisp and clear, the kind of December day that made everything seem sharp and vivid. "Mr. Miller," Miss Henderson called, climbing down from the wagon with tears already glistening in her eyes. "We can't thank you enough for taking such wonderful care of our Max. These are our children," Mr. Henderson added, helping his daughter down, "Emma and Tommy. They've been heartbroken since Max disappeared." Emma, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, looked up at Samuel with serious eyes. "Is Max really okay? Mama said he was very sick when you found him." Samuel knelt to the little girl's level. "He was very sick, but he's much better now, strong and happy and ready to go home with his family." Tommy, the older boy, shifted nervously. Did he forget about us? It's been so long." Before Samuel could answer, Max appeared in the doorway with Ruth and Jacob. The moment he saw the Henderson children, his entire body began wiggling with joy. He bounded toward them with more energy than Samuel had seen since his recovery began, nearly knocking little Emma over in his enthusiasm to reach her. "Max," Emma squealed, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck as he covered her face with kisses. "Max, we missed you so much." Tommy knelt beside his sister, burying his face in Max's fur while the dog whined with happiness and tried to lick both children at once. The reunion was so pure, so full of obvious love and joy, that even Samuel found himself smiling through his tears. "He didn't forget," Mrs. Henderson sobbed, watching her children reunite with their pet. "Look how happy he is. Oh, Max, we thought we'd lost you forever." Miss Henderson approached Samuel while his family celebrated with Max. "We brought something for you," he said, pressing an envelope into Samuel's hands. "It's not nearly enough to repay what you've done, but—" "No," Samuel said firmly, trying to hand the envelope back. "We don't want payment. What we did from the heart." "Then accept it as a gift from our hearts to yours," Mr. Henderson insisted. "Our children have their dog back because of your kindness. Please let us show our gratitude." Before Samuel could protest further, little Emma appeared at his side, tugging on his coat. "Mr. Miller, are you sad that Max is leaving?" The direct question, asked with a child's innocent honesty, nearly undid Samuel's composure completely. "Yes, sweetheart. We've grown to love him very much." Emma considered this with the seriousness that only children could bring to important matters. "But you know he loves you too, right? Even if he has to go home with us, he'll always love you for saving him." Out of the mouths of babes, Samuel felt his heart crack open at the simple truth of her words. "Yes," he managed. "I know he'll always remember us, and we'll always remember him." Emma declared, "Mama, can we write letters to Mr. Miller and his family to tell them how Max is doing?" Miss Henderson smiled through her tears. "Of course we can, sweetheart. I think that would make everyone very happy." The promise of continued connection eased something in Samuel's chest. Max would be gone, but he wouldn't disappear completely from their lives. Ruth and Jacob approached carrying Max's traveling supplies and the gifts they'd prepared. Ruth handed the bag of treats to Mrs. Henderson with detailed instructions about Max's preferences, while Jacob presented his handmade bookmark and carefully written letter to Tommy. "This tells you all about what Max likes to do and eat," Jacob explained, "and how to help him when he gets scared during thunderstorms. He likes to hide under blankets then." Tommy accepted the gifts with the reverence they deserved. "Thank you. I promise we'll take really good care of him. We'll love him just like you did." It was time. The moment they'd all been dreading had arrived. Max seemed to sense the shift in mood and looked between his two families with confusion, as if wondering why everyone suddenly seemed so sad. Samuel knelt beside the dog one last time, taking Max's face gently in his hands. "You're going home now, boy. Back to your real family, where you belong. You be a good dog for Emma and Tommy, you hear? Take care of them like you took care of us." Max's tail wagged uncertainly, and he pressed his forehead against Samuel's, a gesture so trusting and affectionate that Samuel nearly broke down completely. Ruth and Jacob each took their turns saying goodbye, whispering private words of love and gratitude into Max's soft ears. The dog accepted their attention with patient dignity, as if he understood this was important, even if he didn't understand why. When it came time to load Max into the Henderson wagon, he went willingly, settling between the children with obvious contentment. But as the wagon began to move, Max turned to look back at the Miller family with eyes that seemed to say, "Thank you, I love you, I'll never forget." The wagon rolled down the lane with Max's golden head visible between Emma and Tommy, his tail wagging as the children talked to him and petted his fur. Samuel, Ruth, and Jacob stood watching until the wagon disappeared around the bend, taking with it a piece of their heart. "He's happy," Ruth said finally, tears streaming down her face. "Look how happy he is to be with them again." "Yes," Samuel agreed, his own voice thick with emotion. "That's how we know we did the right thing." Jacob wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Papa, do you think we'll ever see him again?" Samuel put his arms around both his children, pulling them close as they stood in their empty yard. "I don't know about seeing him, son, but I know we'll carry him with us always. And thanks to Mrs. Henderson's promise, we'll know how he's doing. That's more than we dared hope for." As they walked back toward the house, Samuel noticed something he hadn't expected. Despite the pain of goodbye, he felt lighter somehow. Not empty, but peaceful. For the first time since Martha's death, he had chosen to love something fully, knowing it might be temporary. He had opened his heart to joy, despite the risk of sorrow. And in doing so, he had learned that love given freely, even when it must be surrendered, was never truly lost. It lived on in changed hearts, in precious memories, in the courage to love again. Max was gone, but the healing he had brought would remain forever. That evening, the Miller family gathered around their fireplace, noticeably quiet without Max's presence, but not empty. They were different now, softer and stronger at the same time, ready to face whatever God brought to their path next. "Thank you," Samuel whispered into the silence, not sure if he was addressing God or Max or the universe itself. "Thank you for reminding us that broken hearts can still choose to love." Outside, the December wind blew cold and sharp, but inside the Miller home warmth endured, the kind that came from having loved well and let go with grace. 3 months after Max left, the first letter arrived. Samuel found it waiting on the kitchen table when he returned from morning chores, his name written in careful child's handwriting on the envelope. Ruth and Jacob gathered around as he opened it with trembling fingers, all of them holding their breath. "Dear Miss Miller and Ruth and Jacob, Max is doing wonderful. He remembers all the tricks you taught him, and he still loves chicken broth best when he's feeling sick. Last week when we had a thunderstorm, he hid under my blanket just like Jacob said he would. Thank you for taking such good care of him. Mama says he's fatter and happier than he's ever been. We think about you every day, and Max gets excited when we say your names. Do you think about us too? Love, Emma Henderson. P.S. Tommy says to tell you that Max still sits perfectly when you tell him to." Ruth wiped tears from her eyes as she finished reading aloud. He remembers us. He gets excited when they say our names. Of course he remembers, Samuel said gently, though his own throat was tight with emotion. Love doesn't just disappear. Over the following months, letters became a treasured connection between the two families. Emma wrote faithfully every few weeks, sharing stories of Max's adventures, his continued good health, and his obvious contentment with his original family. Sometimes she included drawings, stick figures of Max playing with the children, or Max sleeping in his favorite sunny spot by their kitchen window. But the letters brought more than just news of Max. They brought something Samuel hadn't expected, evidence of how profoundly their brief time with the dog had changed his own family. Ruth had begun volunteering at the local animal shelter, helping care for abandoned cats and injured farm animals. Her gentle way with frightened creatures earned praise from the veterinarian, and Samuel often found her reading books about animal care in the evenings. "I want to understand them better," she explained one night, looking up from a manual about treating sick livestock. "After Max, I realized that animals have feelings and memories and souls, maybe. They deserve our kindness." Jacob had started a small business making leather collars and leashes for neighbors' working dogs, using skills Samuel had taught him, but applying them with a new appreciation for the bond between humans and animals. The money he earned, he saved faithfully. "What are you saving for?" Samuel asked one day, watching his son carefully tool a design into a collar for the Yoder family's sheepdog. Jacob looked up with Martha's determined expression. "For when we're ready," he said simply. "For when God brings us another dog who needs a family." The certainty in his son's voice surprised Samuel. "You think that will happen?" "I know it will. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but someday, and when it does, we'll be ready." Jacob returned to his work with quiet confidence. "Max taught us how to love something we might have to let go. Next time, maybe God will let us keep what he sends." Samuel felt his heart stir at his son's faith. In the months since Max's departure, he had indeed felt different, not healed from Martha's loss, exactly, but stronger in his ability to carry that grief alongside new joy. Max had shown them that hearts broken by death could still choose to love again. The transformation wasn't limited to his children. Samuel found himself more patient with difficult neighbors, more willing to help families in crisis, more open to the unexpected ways God worked in their lives. When young Sarah Yoder continued visiting ostensibly to check on their animal care knowledge, but really because she enjoyed their company, Samuel no longer felt guilty about the warmth in his chest when she smiled. "You're different," Sarah observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. She'd become a regular dinner guest, her presence bringing light and laughter back into their home. Lighter, somehow more available. Available to life, to possibility, to whatever comes next. She studied his face with gentle understanding. "Max did that, didn't he? He opened something in you that had been closed since Martha died." Samuel considered her words carefully. "I think he reminded me that choosing not to love doesn't prevent loss. It just prevents joy. Martha wouldn't have wanted me to close my heart to protect it." "No," Sarah agreed softly. "She wouldn't have." As spring arrived, bringing new life to the farm and fresh energy to their daily routines, Samuel realized that Max's greatest gift hadn't been his companionship, though that had been precious. His greatest gift had been teaching them that love multiplied rather than diminished when shared. That opening your heart to one creature made room for loving others more deeply. The proof came on a warm April morning when Jacob burst into the house with barely contained excitement. "Papa, Ruth, come quickly," he called, his voice high with urgency and joy. "There's something in the barn you need to see." They hurried outside, following Jacob toward the familiar building where they'd first found Max months earlier. Near the same bale of hay where Max had collapsed, a small brown and white dog lay curled in obvious exhaustion, her sides heavy with pregnancy. "She's going to have puppies," Ruth whispered in amazement. Soon, by the looks of her, Samuel knelt beside the dog, a beagle mix, smaller than Max but with the same desperate trust in her eyes. She lifted her head weakly, her tail managing the faintest wag as Samuel extended his hand. "Where did you come from, little mother?" he murmured gently. "And how did you know to find us?" The dog's answer was to press her head against his palm, with obvious relief, as if she'd been searching for exactly this, a safe place to bring her babies into the world. Jacob knelt beside his father, his face glowing with quiet triumph. I told you, Pop. I told you God would send us another one when we were ready." Ruth was already hurrying toward the house. "I'll get warm milk and some soft blankets. She'll need a comfortable nest for when the puppies come." As his daughter bustled away on her mission of mercy, Samuel looked at Jacob's confident smile and felt his heart expand with wonder. His son had been right. They were ready now. Ready to love without fear, to give without counting the cost, to open their home and hearts to whatever broken thing God placed in their path. The Beagle's puppies arrived 2 days later, 5 tiny, perfect creatures who filled the barn with new life and possibility. Samuel's family threw themselves into caring for the small family with the same dedication they'd shown Max, but with a new understanding of their role as temporary guardians rather than owners. Word spread quickly through their community about the Miller family's latest rescue, but the response was different now. Instead of disapproval, neighbors brought supplies and offered help. The story of Max, how the Millers had saved a dying dog only to return him to his grateful family, had become legend in their district, proof that kindness could be both practical and profound. "You've changed our whole community's understanding of stewardship," Bishop Stoltzfors told Samuel one evening as they watched the puppies play in the barnyard. "You've shown us that caring for God's creatures, all of them, is part of our calling." Even Amos Fisher had softened, bringing leftover meat scraps for the nursing mother and admitting that perhaps there were different ways to serve the Lord's purposes. But the most meaningful visitor came on a sunny May afternoon when a familiar wagon turned up their lane. Samuel's heart leaped as he recognized the Henderson family, and beside them in the wagon bed, a golden form with ears perked in recognition. "Max!" Ruth screamed, running toward the wagon before it fully stopped. Max leaped down and bounded toward the Miller family, his joy obvious as he greeted each of them with enthusiastic kisses and full-body wiggles. He was sleek and healthy, his coat gleaming, his eyes bright with intelligence and contentment. "We were visiting relatives nearby," Mrs. Henderson explained, as the families embraced, "and the children insisted we stop to see you. Max has been restless for days, like he knew we were getting close." Emma and Tommy rushed to see the new puppies, exclaiming over their tidy size and fluffy cuteness, while Max investigated his old domain with obvious pleasure. He remembered everything, his favorite spots, his animal friends, the exact location where his food bowl used to sit. "She's beautiful," Samuel said, running his hands through Max's thick fur. "You can tell how loved he is." "Thanks to you," Mr. Henderson replied. "Emma still talks about what you told her, that Max would always remember us for saving him. She's right, you know. He's a different dog because of your care. More trusting, more gentle. You didn't just save his life, you saved his spirit." As the afternoon wore on, both families sharing stories and watching Max play gently with the curious puppies, Samuel understood that this was what redemption looked like. Not the erasure of loss, but the transformation of it into something beautiful. Max would return home with the Hendersons tonight, as was right and proper. The puppies would eventually be weaned and find their own families. Sarah might accept Samuel's unspoken invitation to become part of their lives permanently. The seasons would continue their eternal cycle of growth and rest, joy and sorrow, holding and letting go. But the lesson would remain. Broken things could be mended, closed hearts could be reopened, and love shared freely multiplied rather than diminished. A starving dog had collapsed in their barn, and in choosing to feed him until his tail wagged again, they had discovered that their own hearts, hungry for purpose and connection, after too much grief, could be nourished back to fullness too. As evening fell and the Henderson wagon disappeared down the lane for the second time, Samuel stood with his children watching the sky paint itself in shades of hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose love over fear, new chances to serve as instruments of God's grace in a world that desperately needed more kindness. "Papa," Ruth said quietly, her hand slipping into his, "do you think Mama would be proud of us, of what we did for Max and what we're doing for these puppies?" Samuel squeezed his daughter's hand, thinking of Martha's gentle spirit and unwavering belief that broken things were put in their path so they could learn to mend them and be mended in return. "Yes, Liebchen," he said with absolute certainty. "I think she'd be very proud indeed." In the barn, the mother beagle settled her babies for the night while Daisy nickered softly from her stall and Gertie the chicken roosted peacefully nearby. All God's creatures resting together in the sanctuary the Miller family had learned to provide, not from duty or obligation, but from hearts made new by the transformative power of love, freely given and gracefully released. And in that moment, Samuel Miller knew with profound gratitude that they were exactly where they belonged.